Lorraine in Hillingdon. Good morning, Lorraine.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Lorraine.
Good morning. As you can imagine, my call is about the ULEZ expansion, which is affecting the area which I live in and has also just affected a local by-election, as I'm sure you know. I just wondered if you realise the impact that this expansion is going to have on local residents.
Lorraine, I absolutely do. As you rightly say, we had a by-election. We had a number of by-elections last week, but one of them was in Uxbridge, where we hoped to win it, but we didn't win it. We had many people in Uxbridge talking to voters. I think we talked to about 2/3 of the voters across Uxbridge, and ULEZ came up, Lorraine, as you can imagine, because in the middle of a cost of living crisis, having to pay more to drive your car is something which is very difficult for many families.
It really is. Obviously,
I love how I just didn't even answer the question. Just said, well, ULEZ is happening, and there was an election about it. Okay. Do you want to assuage this person's concerns at all? Or do you just want to admit the facts about what happened?
we live, we're adjacent to the M25, we're adjacent to the M4 and Heathrow Airport. And if the real issue is air quality, then I think that should be taken into account. People will be just diverting around. They will be driving on the M25 and the M4 where they're not restricted, parking quarter of a mile away where they'd be in Berkshire or Buckinghamshire. So all it's doing is pushing congestion and traffic and non-compliant vehicles into the surrounding areas.
What I would say is that the ULEZ, you're making points that are made again and again and again, and we've had wild phone-ins on this. It'd be incredible. But then there's the environment, but then there's the direct question, Keir Starmer. What do you want Sadiq Khan to do?
I want Sadiq to reflect on it, and
what does that mean?
Spoken to him.
I'm glad Nicky Campbell actually pressed him and says that means nothing. Please identify an actual material thing that you're doing. When really true, the material thing that it should be doing is providing subsidy for people to upgrade their cars. It's as simple as that, right? This isn't really a climate issue, as I said. It's a local air pollution issue. And also, as Martin correctly points out in chat, tell them that it was the fault of Grant Shapps and of Boris Johnson for implementing it, and for Grant Shapps making sure that TfL funding was contingent on ULEZ expanding to the new boundaries.
Well, this is being rolled out, and I want him to reflect on that rollout because of the impact it's having on people like...
We've had a week's reflection. Yeah. So what's come out of that?
Just let me put it in context, because there's a law in place, as you know, that requires the Mayor of London to take measures to reduce air pollution. So once it gets above a certain level, he's required to take... Now, that's a measure that this government's put in place. So the law is actually driven by the government, and the first ULEZ scheme was actually introduced by a Tory mayor, but actually it is about air pollution. I want him to reflect, to look at the scheme and see whether there are things that can be done to make it easier for people like Lorraine. Now, I spoke to him immediately after the by-election. I'd been talking to his team beforehand.
A frank exchange of views, was it?
Yes, of course. I mean, I've got a lot of respect for the Mayor of London. I've known him a very long time.
So what do you want him to do?
I want him to reflect and see whether there's more that can be done to help people like
What more can be done?
Well, I think there are a number of things that we discussed. The first is the scrappage scheme, the money that people get if they actually change their car. The government has put money behind similar schemes in other places, Birmingham and Bristol, but it hasn't put any money into London. And I think the government should do that, because obviously the cost, the dilemma people have is, do I change my car, which might cost me money, or do I pay this daily charge? If we make it easier for them to change their car with a proper scrappage scheme, then that massively helps people like Lorraine. But the government at the moment won't do it. So that's one measure. But, in the exchange I had with Sadiq,
where are you going to find the money? Where are you going to find the money, Keir? I thought there were going to be no uncosted promises. I thought there were going to be no uncosted policies at all. But here you are saying we're going to find money from nowhere to assuage Lorraine's concerns around the scrappage scheme to make sure that she can afford to upgrade her vehicle to avoid ULEZ charges. Suddenly, when it's not Unite the Union asking for a good policy that requires state funding, and it's a random person he's trying to convince on a talk show, suddenly he can find the money. Weird. Strange, that.
Want the mayor, I want to look more broadly at what...
But the scheme will go ahead. The expansion will go ahead.
Well, that, in the end, is a decision for the mayor, but I want him to reflect on that because I'm.
No, it's not a decision for the mayor. It's being given out by the DFT as a policy that is contingent on TfL getting funding from the government. Sadiq Khan has no choice in expanding ULEZ because he's already been hamstrung by the kind of the requisite actions he has to take by what he's been told by the Department for Transport.
I'm aware of.
There's a lot of reflection going on here. Do you think the expansion should go ahead?
Well,
this is the problem. Before that by-election, the esteemed Chris Mason asked you about ULEZ, and you kind of dodged the question about 6 times. People don't want dodge, and they don't want dither. They want decisiveness. They want answers. Do you want the scheme to go ahead?
Look,
from all the interviews that I've seen of politicians, Nicky Campbell, ironically, has been one of the best. He's better than Sophie Ridge or Trevor Phillips, for example. Better than like Beth Rigby or whatever it might be. Or Laura Kernsberg. He's here saying, no. I asked a question. Answer the bloody question with a straight answer. That's a trap because then Keir will be asked, would you make TfL funding contingent on ULEZ? I guess the response to that, you say, well, ULEZ would have already been rolled out by then because it has to be for the current TfL funding, right? So once it's there, we'll keep it but try and mitigate it. Probably the way I'd answer that question.
I realise why you're putting this to me in this way, but we can't pretend that this is a simple political decision. You can just say yes, no, without regard to the legal context. If the law requires a measure to be taken, it is not in the gift of the mayor to say, I'm simply not going to do it. So he's got to do something. What I'm working with him on and asking him to reflect on is, in this scheme, is there more that we can do to help people like Lorraine? And that's an ongoing discussion. Obviously, I'm not going to put suggestions on air as to where that should be resolved. I'm well aware of the problem with Lorraine. But, Nicky, it's not just a question of a political choice that either I or Sadiq can say, yes, no, we're not going to bother. If the law requires you to do something, you can't simply do nothing.
Sally in St Austell. Hello, Sally.
Hello there. Good morning.
Hi, Sally.
Good morning. Yes, so I'm wondering what you're going to do about the dental health crisis. I always vote for Labour, but I just feel that, if you come into power, will there be a turnaround in what's happening? Because I've actually had to pull, living in Cornwall now, there's no NHS dentists. There are, but you have to have a plan with them. So basically, it is, they've all gone private.
How are your teeth? How have you been coping?
It's been horrendous. I do have a small denture at the front, which is broken. It's unfitting.
So some people have been pulling their own teeth out.
Well, I have. I've pulled a back tooth out and one near the front, and I have to order online this dental material that I have to make myself to make that replacement tooth. And I've also got a back tooth now. I'm in chronic pain with it, and it looks like I'm going to have to pull that tooth out myself.
Wow. Keir Starmer, I mean, you have been clear on the need for reform of the whole NHS, but dental issues massive. 9 out of 10 NHS dental practices across the UK not accepting new adult patients for treatment under the health service. 8 in 10 NHS practices not taking on children. Lots of other data I could give you now, but the main data is what we just heard from Sally there.
Yeah, Sally, I'm so sorry to hear about the situation that you're in and what you've had to resort to. Even hearing you say it, I mean, I've heard other stories like this, but it's horrendous. We've got to overhaul the NHS. It's as simple as that.
And I just feel it's back to the poor law.
Yeah,
it's like the Keynesian society now.
Yeah, Sally, I mean, the NHS, I'd say it's on its knees. My wife, who works for the NHS, says, no, Keir, it's on its face. And, this runs through my blood. My mum was a nurse. My sister was a nurse. My wife works for the NHS. Her mum was a doctor. So NHS runs through our blood.
I thought this caller who comes in saying NHS dentistry is on its knees. We need help. People are pulling out their own teeth with pliers. And Keir says, well, actually, I think you'll find my dad was a toolmaker and my mum was a nurse, and we're going to put AI into the health service to make it more efficient through reform, and isn't going to actually commit to any policy that's going to materially help this woman. Like, this is the world that we live in. This is the kind of dross that we are going to be expecting from the incoming government, right? As someone who has dental problems themselves, I absolutely despair at how garbage the choice is at the next election, given that he can't answer in a substantive way. He can't do it. He offers nothing other than, I know things sound bad for your dental health. My mum was a nurse. My wife works in the NHS. His dad will make the tools to pull the teeth. True.
Yeah, we've got to get the NHS back on its
But
feet.
if I may, we're talking about dentistry, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I have to be a harsh disciplinarian in the time we have. What about dentists specifically? I know you want to make the points about NHS reform, but what about specifically? That's what Sally wants to know. That's what so many people want to know.
Yeah.
Dentistry. What are you going to do?
Dentistry need to be part of the change and reform that we have the NHS, Sally. So we've got to get it back on its feet. Then we've got to make it fit for the future, which means
This man's an idiot. This man is just like legitimately fridge temperature IQ. Just sitting here, and they need money, right? I'm sorry, Keir. It needs money. The dental sector needs more money. The NHS needs more money. It's not difficult to see that the reason why they're not accepting new patients is because they do not have the capacity. You need to expand the capacity.
Literally a communist.
And he's just sitting here saying, we need to reform it, we need to get it back on its feet. Just a bunch of platitudes by literally being told by a caller similar to the news stories that we've seen, people are pulling their own teeth out. Dentistry, it's not a staffing issue, it's a capacity issue. And the reason why it's a capacity issue is because so many of these dental practices are privately owned rather than NHS run. Obviously, it's difficult to get an appointment at a private dentist at the best of times anyway. But on top of that, this could be the same infrastructure that we have for the NHS to be able to see patients on the cheap. But of course, the privatisation and all the reforms that have come into NHS dentistry to make more private sector involvement have ruined everything, as always. And Keir has already rolled back on his commitments to be able to scale back the privatisation of the NHS sector. Brilliant, great. Love it. I'm really glad we have such a distinctive choice at the next election.
Going down the route of prevention, of technology, of having community-based health and mental health. This is, Sally, one of the things I've set out is that if we're privileged enough to come into government to serve the country, then we will have missions or purpose, and I've set out 5 for an incoming Labour government, only 5.
It's like listening to Mark Harper or Grant Shapps just go, well, actually, have you thought about Rishi Sunak's priorities, which are the people's priorities? Just regurgitating these rehearsed lines coming from his spin doctors about we need reform, we need to change our model, we need to implement technology, we have 5 missions. And I'm just like, you got someone on the line, you were speaking with genuine members of the public who are desperate to see reform of the NHS dentistry because of the absolute state that their teeth are in, having to pull out their own teeth. And you're here just repeating platitudes, repeating whatever your spin doctors have told you to say. And people wonder why people are disengaged from politics when this is the level, this is the kind of disdain that our political actors treat members of the public with. They won't answer our questions, they won't give us real solutions to problems, they just repeat the same platitudes, the same lines, the same branding over and over and over again. It's despicable. It makes a mockery of the entire system. Obviously, they said it was ever thus, right? It's always been like this. But there was a very short period where Jeremy Corbyn genuinely listened to people's concerns and looked like a sincere politician who actually cared about the people that he was going to be representing or theoretically representing. And this automaton is up here just regurgitating shit whilst speaking to genuine members of the public on the phone. Don't vote Labour, kids. Don't vote Labour. Waste your time.
So we can concentrate and focus on them. One of them is focused on the NHS, which is to rebuild the NHS and make it fit for the future. Okay. And dentistry will have to be part of that.
How will you make it more worthwhile and cost-effective and attractive for dentists to take on?
So up to this point in the entire interview, he has said literally nothing. He has said, we will expand the scrappage scheme, and that's it. No other concrete policy. Imagining Mariana Mazzucato screaming into her hands every time Starmer and his Bellens talk about missions. Yeah, missions with no other policy structures around them. Part of Mazzucato's mission-driven governance is all about understanding your plan to achieve those missions, right? It's a lot of corporate speak, but I guess I understand where she's coming from with this. But the whole point of having mission-centered governance is that the missions have policies that feed into them, which they're not doing. They're not saying anything.
Morning, John.
I'll go there. I just wanted to ask, does Keir Starmer think that its two-child benefit cap policy is a nail in the coffin for not only Labour in Scotland, but the Union?
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
That's a good one. That's a real good one. Labour's lurch to the right is going to cost them votes in Scotland. It'll be incredible. It'll be absolutely incredible if even after all of the apparent alleged corruption that we've not seen any proof of yet, quote unquote, but the investigation is ongoing into the SNP's finances, Imagine what will happen. Imagine the kind of fallout there'll be if Labour can still lose Scotland, even after the SNP have screwed themselves over, and Labour will only have themselves to blame. In fact, there was already a schism between Labour in England and Labour in Scotland regarding trans healthcare and trans identification, because Labour MSPs all support the gender recognition reforms, which was abstained on as far as Section 35 being used in the Commons. Based upon what we're going to hear later in this conversation, Keir Starmer has already walked back a lot of the pro-trans rhetoric previously and taken a more GC line on this.
I just think that Labour in Scotland aren't entirely being honest with people. I mean, it was just a couple of weeks ago we were hearing that Keir Starmer was saying that it was like had some kind of significant influence over Labour in the UK, but I don't entirely believe that.
So what do you think should happen with the child benefit cap?
I think it should be scrapped completely. I really do. I think it's an awful policy that's going to set a lot of people into poverty up here. I mean, we need children. Early intervention is absolutely crucial to a good education and more sort of like a stable life for them. You know, I mean, how can we starve children growing up knowing that it might affect?
Go on, call him Kid Starver. Call him Sir Kid Starver. Do it.
The life later.
And Keir Starmer said he would not change the policy on the two-child benefit cap. Sir Keir, tell John why you wouldn't.
John, we can't do that because I can't make uncosted funding.
Then cost it. Tax the rich, right? What you are saying by refusing to tax the rich and to keep the two-child benefit cap is that you're happy to see children starve just to keep bankers happy, just to keep the financial sector happy, to keep landlords happy. That is the decision that you have made. Economics and politics is about choices, and you have chosen to put the financial sector and all the goons that populate it above children in this country. And before people on the comments later talk about don't have more children if you can't afford them, the introduction of the two-child benefit cap didn't increase employment, right? It didn't have a positive employment effect, and it didn't create a disfertility effect either. So it doesn't do what you want it to do. It doesn't get more people into jobs, and it doesn't actually stop people from having third children anyway. All it does is impoverish children, which is an anti-growth measure. Like, one of Keir's missions is growing the economy, and he thinks he can grow the economy by continuing with our sluggish productivity, by ensuring that people have a stunted growth based upon the fact that they're going to be malnourished as children because of a dumb benefit policy that he refuses to scrap because he doesn't want to upset rich people by implementing a tiny little bit of a wealth tax that could raise up to £10 billion, which is 6 times what it would cost to get rid of the two-child benefit cap. This guy's an absolute monster, and I'm glad that he's going to be known as Sir Kid Starver for a very long time. It's not going to go away. It's going to stick until he U-turns on this, which, given that all of his other U-turns have been away from progressive policy, you'll expect this is one of the many things that he'll stick to. And
that doesn't mean I'm indifferent, John, to the impact,
child poverty,
to the impact that these measures in welfare have. And we will have of course, we'll have a child poverty strategy in government, a Labour government, as we did last time we were in power. And of course, we will drive down levels of child poverty as we did in the 13 years we were last in power. But we cannot make...
Yeah, in the 13 years you were last in power, there was child benefit for third and fourth children. And, you know, not only is there the economic effect of impoverishing families, but on top of that, you're going to keep the clause. You're going to make women who've been prove that they've been to ensure that they can get benefits for their third child that they didn't want as a consequence of that. How sick are you and twisted are you as an individual, Keir, that you are prioritising keeping the city happy over getting rid of something as absolutely grotesque as the clause? What a sick individual.
Unfunded spending commitments. We know why we can't. Liz Truss did that last year. Unfunded commitments, in her case.
Tax cuts. Fiscal expansion for tax cuts is not the same as fiscal expansion for investment. And on top of that, we're not even asking for fiscal expansion for child benefit. We are asking for more tax commitments on the rich. Right? We're asking for literally the opposite of what Liz Truss wanted, which was lower taxes on the rich. We want a wealth tax. We want to use that to pay for starving children. I know, scrap Trident, which could pay for the removing the child benefit cap 3 times over. We could do many things, but you have just made a deliberate political choice to starve children, and that's why you are Sir Kid Starver, and it will stick.
To tax cuts, it crashed the economy, and people are still paying the price. Only 10 minutes ago, we were
And again, what he is doing here is squandering the best opportunity the left have had in government ever in this country to reverse the rhetoric around neoliberalism, and he's failed, right? He could, by framing the rhetoric around this into the public consciousness that you could never ever do tax cuts for the rich again, because what the real big problem that Liz trusted wasn't unfunded spending commitments, it was tax cuts for the rich. And then you immediately try and equate tax cuts for the rich with a collapsing economy. And then you talk about the lack of investment, you talk about the failures of austerity, and you use this as a launch pad to be able to take the rhetoric around increasing public spending being an overall public good and pro-growth in a Keynesian sense, and use that to try and get that same rhetoric within the public consciousness. But instead they're doing the opposite by saying governments can never spend money ever, right? All government spending is always like a household budget. We're back to 80s Thatcherism. That's why he's a Thatcherite. That's why Rachel Reeves is a Thatcherite, because they were trying to continue this nonsense narrative about government spending being like a household budget, and they are taking the biggest win that we've had on the left and absolutely incinerating it. I absolutely despair at this man.
Talking about the mortgages and the increase in mortgages, that's the sort of price people are still paying for unfunded commitments. So we can't do that. But John, it doesn't mean I'm indifferent to the points that you made. It doesn't mean we won't have a strategy in government to deal with child poverty. But I can't make unfunded commitments of any sort as we go into the election. And, that's the sort of tough decisions that we have to make because of the damage that's been done to our economy over the last 13 years.
John?
Yeah, I do think Tory policies and Labour don't really seem to kind of mix well, in Scotland. So I think...
I mean, just tell him to tax the rich. Tell him to tax the rich, mate.
Probably. Independence is the main thing that I need to focus on.
Well, tell me about the child poverty issue, because there are campaigners who say that not changing the policy will continue to drive a lot of children, a lot of families into poverty. Is that what you're focusing on here, John?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think people need to come up and actually speak to people in communities and actually have a look. I mean, everyone is absolutely struggling. Scrapping that two-child benefit payment was one of the things that we were told was going to happen with Labour. So I don't understand why all of a sudden the new Tory policies came in and now you want to U-turn on that and actually keep it. I think Labour's becoming more blue than red these days.
True. Very, very true. It's been absolutely rinsed by this caller. Right? You should have mentioned the tax cuts, really and truly. But I think that if you're going to criticise the two-child benefit cap, you should criticise it on grounds of the poverty that's going to cause, the fact that you don't need to deficit spend on it. You can just tax the rich more to be able to pay for it, or cut spending elsewhere that's unnecessary, like military spending, which we just agreed to increase again because of the war in Ukraine, for example. The other way of criticising it is you talk about growth. You say this is an anti-growth policy. Like, it's really worth really pointing through that one of the things that underpins our low growth is low productivity. And of course, keeping children poorly fed will make them less productive when they join the workforce. Having jobs that don't pay well, that are casualised, which is another thing that we got massively watered down at the NPF. This New Deal for working people that's supposed to be Angela Rayner's brainchild, for example. This is also something that would generate productivity by getting people to actually have a vocation again, rather than just performing the drudgery that they do every day without any proper career prospects because of the failures of austerity and supply-side labour market policy and the casualisation of our workforce. You can talk about all of these things as being pro-growth, right? Because Keir Starmer's not going to listen to you. Right-wingers also are not going to listen to you if you talk about why it's bad that children are in poverty, because these people don't care, right? This is like the bit in the Simpsons movie where Apu goes up to Mr. Burns and asks him to look inside his heart, and he calls the hounds, right? He's got his finger on the release the hounds button right now. And you can't try and win him over, or win over the public who support the policies that he's pushing forward. You can't win these people over by asking them to look into their heart and see why child poverty is bad. But what you can do is say, you don't understand economics. If you really truly want a productive workforce to get the growth that you desperately want as the highest in the G7, sustained highest growth, right, in the G7, right, public spending commitments will help you boost some growth, but if you really want to have proper sustained growth, you need higher productivity. And you're not going to get a productive workforce, A, if people can't afford to feed their kids, they're going to be less productive, and then their children will be less productive when they're in the workforce as well, which is obviously a long-term problem, and your highest sustained growth in the G7 is a long-term goal. So if you really want to convince these people, you talk about the overall macroeconomic benefits of keeping children fed, rather than trying to appeal to their internal sense of morality, because of course these people don't have one, so that's going to be impossible for you to do that. Of course, most of these people will also ignore you about macroeconomics as well, because they're virtue ethicists who think that it is fundamentally immoral for the state to be seen to be incentivizing people having children they can't afford, even though that's not what the two-child benefit cap does in a kind of material sense, because these people are not materialists, they're idealists. They care about the idea of people being seen to be incentivized to do it, whether or not they even are or not, right? They can't be seen to be permissive of it, which is much worse to them than the material impact of poverty, or whether or not the policy actually works in changing the behaviours of the people whose behaviour they want to get changed, because they don't care about the outcome, they care about the ideas behind it.
So what would you, okay, let's tie this one up.
Yeah.
John, it's a great point. Let's tie this one up. What will your poverty strategy be?
Oh, well, obviously we'll set that out in government, but the most important thing is to grow the economy. We've had no significant
But that
growth.
takes a while, doesn't it?
Yeah, but
It takes a productive workforce, Keir. It takes people being able to know that they can put food on their kids' plates. It involves children having a well-fed upbringing for when they join the workforce. It's almost like Keir Starmer doesn't understand a first thing about economics or macroeconomics. Sure, he's a lawyer, fine, I get it, but that's why you don't join Parliament in 2015 and immediately become leader of a party 6 years later before properly understanding the basics of economics, right? I'm an idiot. Most of what I know about economics has just come off of Wikipedia, and even I know more than he does because he's a clown.
bear with me. We've had no significant growth in the economy for 13 years. And that is the single cause of the problems that we've had, exacerbated by the mini budget of last year. If you don't grow your economy, then you don't have the yield for your public services. If we'd grown the economy, just to take this example, in the last 13 years, at the same rate as the last Labour government did, we would have tens of billions of pounds to pay.
Okay, what was the policy that the Conservatives implemented as a broad policy platform over those 13 years that led to low growth? Your Chancellor knows this because she wrote about it all those years back, even though she repudiates her own words now. She's already said, right, the lack of investment due to austerity is what led to this period of low growth. In fact, we can see that across the entirety of the history of this country when we have had high growth because of fiscal expansion into infrastructure projects and public spending. Yet you're here telling us, well, the issue is we can't spend money because we need to grow the economy, when we all know here on the actual real proper economist side, all the Keynesians, we know that you want to be able to spend money on things that are positive ROI to generate the economic growth that's going to get you there. But Keir doesn't understand this because he's a lawyer and not an economist. So he thinks that you can just magically get growth from nowhere, from the private sector in the absence of public spending. When Rachel Reeves, in her own article from 2011, explicitly said that there is no guarantee the private sector will fill in the gaps in terms of investment in the absence of the public sector. But he doesn't know that, of course, because he's an idiot.
To spend on our public
97.
services. 97 to 2010.
The economy started growing in 1993, 1994, and Gordon Brown and Tony Blair got a pretty golden legacy. You know that's the case. So people want people to be straight. You know that's the case. It's a very different situation now.
Well, I think because we've now had 13 years of this government, and we have 13 years of last Labour government, what we can now do is put the record side by side. And if you look at the record on growth of the last Labour government, we grew the economy at about 2.5% in those 13 years. This government hasn't done that. If we had done what the last Labour government done, we'd have had tens of billions of pounds to spend on our public services that we don't have.
But the last Labour government said there's no money left at the end of it. And
Why, chat? Why? This is so depressing. I mean, again, because Keir can't commit to any unfunded spending commitments. He can't just say the government spent money on public services and invested, and that's why we had high growth. Because he's also promising now to not engage in investment. I'm just going to magic growth out of nowhere, right? Obviously, we should caveat this by saying the last Labour government under New Labour, they did get public investment. It was through PFIs. And one of the big reasons why a lot of our public services are massively underfunded is because, of course, first of all, we've had austerity that cuts back their budgets anyway. And second of all, so much of their budget is being spent on servicing PFI debt, which isn't illusory debt like the public debt. That's real debt to private debtors. Our public services are doubly underfunded as a consequence of the failures of the Labour government to invest public money rather than letting the private sector feast on the corpse of the public sector, and the Conservatives are deliberately cutting budgets on top of that to try and force provision into the private sector as well. But he can't say this because he can't speak bad about the Labour government, and he also can't talk about why public investment is good. And we've got Nicky Campbell on the other hand going, well, actually, truly the money did run out, so all of that lack of growth was necessary because there was no money left, which is exactly what we have now, where we have no money left, because that can happen to a sovereign currency issuer.
Lots of questions coming in on gender. You may or may not be pleased to know. Mr. Starmer, what is a woman? If you don't say she's an adult female, I shall not vote Labour, as I have all my life. That's from Merrill in Leicester. Another one for...
Yes, of course, because, there definitely wasn't a concerted effort from the gutter press of this country to deliberately find a wedge issue to try and turn women who usually vote left-wing into conservatives based upon a tiny wedge issue that they can headbang on about for no reason for ages, given that women are consistently voting more left-wing over time. They had to find a wedge issue somewhere.
Well, Keir, has his party decided on the definition of what a woman is? And has the Labour Party policy on single-sex spaces and trans rights changed? What is it? And another one, could you ask...
Everyone who asks questions here is an idiot. You have no real problems if this is what you're texting the leader of the opposition to talk about, right? Middle of a cost of living crisis. Can you tell me what a woman is? Clowns.
Keir, if he ever thought he'd be stumped over the question, what is a woman? And why do we ask this question and not what is a man? That's from Michael as well. I guess, I suppose the question is, why did you announce a change in gender recognition policy via an article in The Guardian? There was no press release, there were no interviews. You're trying to sneak it out because it's a tricky one for you?
No.
You all struggle with it, the penis question, don't you?
Well, look, firstly, a woman is...
Welcome to the British media. Welcome to British political discourse. We have a prime-time DJ on Radio 5 Live speaking to the leader of the opposition, His Majesty's opposition no less, and saying, you struggle with the penis question, don't you? Well done, Britain. Very normal, extreme, the most normalist of islands strikes again.
An adult female, so let's clear that one up. Secondly, in relation to the process, after we finished, we had by-elections last week. We had a fantastic win in Selby, as you know, overturning a 20,000 majority, Tory majority. We've never done that in the history of the Labour Party. But as we finished that, and then we went to Nottingham for a 3-day national policy forum, which doesn't sound too interesting, but it's where the Labour Party grinds through its policy. And
by grinds through its policy, it means him and his leader of the opposition office grind through all of the good policy to get rid of it from the manifesto. That's what they do, or they ignore the union so that they storm out, and then Unite don't come to the end of an NPF dinner because they're so pissed off with the leadership. That NPF, that same one.
At the end of that, we have agreed policy that came out at about 3 o'clock on Sunday on a whole range of issues, including on gender recognition, and it gave us the chance to reflect on what happened in Scotland recently in relation to gender recognition, and to be clear that we want to...
What happened?
And reflect on the fact that he doesn't know what the act even does. After all of this discourse, after everything that's happened, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, now discussing about how this has affected their way of changing gender recognition, will in a couple of seconds' time, because I've pre-watched this on Twitter, he will admit that he does not know what the gender recognition reforms in Scotland actually did, because this man is an idiot. He doesn't even bother researching the topics that he talks about.
We want to modernise the legislation.
Well, Scottish Labour disagrees with you. They're continuing to back demedicalising the process.
Yeah, so... we don't agree. We don't think that self-identification is the right way forward. We've reflected on what happened in Scotland.
You know what's really stupid, right? Is everyone keeps talking about self-ID, right? I'm going to let you in a little secret, chat. I'm going to let you in a tiny little secret. We already have self-ID. We already have self-ID, right? You change your name yourself. You then, when you order a new passport, you say you're changing your gender. You call up which identification documents that you have, like driving license. You just say that you've changed your gender, and they will change the marker for you. That's literally all it takes. We already have self-ID in this country. What he's actually talking about here is gender recognition, right? Gender recognition reform, how you get a GRC, a gender recognition certificate, is not the same as you changing your social gender that you use every day, right? For example, interesting enough, I actually don't have F on my passport yet because I changed mine before properly started transitioning. But even so, I could, the next time I have a new passport, I can just get that changed. But what I don't have is a gender recognition certificate. Now, what this does do, this doesn't change how you access spaces, how you access quote unquote safe spaces or anything like that. All it does is it means it has something to do with pensions and tax, I believe. And it means that when you get marriage certificates, birth certificates, death certificates, they have your correct gender recognition on them. That's literally it. That's all the gender recognition reform change did. Now, this is really important because there was a trans girl in Warrington who was murdered in broad daylight, Brianna Jai. And because of the kind of policy that Keir Starmer supports, she is at her own funeral had to be called a boy. She didn't have her gender properly recognised in death because of the kind of policy that Keir Starmer supports. It doesn't affect which prison you go to. It doesn't affect what crisis centres that you have access to. Those were already protected by the Equality Act as it exists today, as I'm assuming Keir Starmer already knows, because he was literally the Director of Public Prosecutions, as he so likes to tell us so frequently. He must know that the Equality Act already has these provisions for there to be blocking of trans people's access given certain conditions and certain stipulations. But he doesn't care, because telling the truth doesn't win him votes here. We're shitting on trans people. He might pull across some GCs under the impression that he has that trans people have nowhere to go. We have plenty of places to go, and where we're not going? The Labour Party. Fuck you.
And therefore there should, well, as you know, there was a law passed that
I thought you were reflecting on the specific prisoner.
Well, I mean, that's an aspect of what was going on in Scotland, but there was a law, as you know, there's a bill going through in relation to this. But
that became very emblematic, and it was separate from the legal process. But anyway, yeah, carry on.
Sure.
Carry on.
So we've set out that we want to modernise the process, get rid of some of the indignities in the process, keep it a medical process, and we've always said
this is all just for a gender recognition certificate. That's all he's quibbling about. Access to a GRC to be able to use the right gender in when you get married. That's literally it. That's it. That's all he's quibbling over, what he wants to medicalise. Because the current procedure that we have for changing your gender legally, that's not medicalised at all because you don't need a GRC for it. You just change your documents, you change your name. It's extremely simple.
And continued to say, and Sunday when we completed our policy forum allowed us to be clear that there should be safe spaces for women, particularly in relation to violence against women and girls. And when I was Director of Public Prosecution, spent a lot of time dealing with cases of violence against women and girls, and therefore feel very strongly about these safe spaces for women.
And why are trans women, are you saying they're disproportionately likely to be violent in these situations? I don't understand. What are you saying?
No, I think that it's more that biological women who've been subject to violence against women and girls want a safe space where they can feel
safe from what?
Well, a safe space where they can feel that they are.
He can't even answer questions. This is a man who we're supposed to think is going to have the ability to be Prime Minister, and he gets asked basic questions, and she goes, I know I stutter. I'm in no position to critique Keir Starmer for stuttering over his words frequently, right? But, this is just a basic question about, well, what are they going to keep them safe from?
I'm literally a communist.
We're just answering a basic question. What are they going to be at threat from, right? Are trans women a threat? And the thing is, he can't bring himself to just say what he really thinks, which is that, yes, he believes trans women are a threat.
Properly supported and protected. And this comes from the tales of survivors.
Why wouldn't they be properly supported and protected? I don't understand. Why wouldn't that be the case?
Well, I think the Scottish prisoner case probably answers that question in terms of.
There are a lot of people in the Isla Bryson was the name of the person. You think there are a lot of
There are a lot of examples. I'm not saying there's
a
lot of examples of that, but I do think the principle of safe spaces is very important for women.
let's go back to the Isla Bryson case as well. It's really important to understand that when he says we need to protect safe spaces as a kind of new policy, this is already a thing, as I said before, that exists. You can already have certain spaces which, under certain conditions, you can ban access to trans women to and only allow cis women into, but there has to be a good and specific reason as to why. Very few of these places exist because there are very, very few precious good reasons. One of those reasons is prisons. Now, what you can't do is just say no trans women allowed, but when a trans person is going to be put into the prison system, the value judgment is made on an individual case for every single prisoner, as the current provisions are as they are in the Equality Act as it is, which, as I said, Keir Starmer must know. He must know this, that when they are going to get put into prison, they do a risk assessment. If they are deemed to be too much of a risk for the female prison population, they get put in a men's prison. Guess what happened to Isla Bryson, right? She got put in solitary confinement in a women's prison whilst they did her risk assessment, so she wasn't going to be any of a risk to the general population of that prison. They did the assessment. They found out that she was a risk because, of course, she was, and they put her in a men's prison. The system already works. The system literally works already as it does currently. And he's trying to pretend that it's somehow broken and that the Isla Bryson case was a case of it not working, when it was literally a case of the system working perfectly and as intended and as is already stipulated by the current rules. The man's a moron. His brain is soup. I can't believe it's going down to the level of culture war when the economy is so bad. He's forcing himself to, right? I was talking about the Rishi Sunak tweet before yesterday, where, you know, Rishi Sunak's really going down to the gutter politics, which of course Labour tempted them to do so by literally putting posters out on Twitter calling Rishi Sunak basically a offender, which, you know, great, real gutter politics. But when the Tories can't attack them on the economy, they can't have any difference between the two of them on, say, public spending or fiscal investment or fiscal expansion or Keynesianism versus monetarism, because they've got pretty much identical platforms when it comes to the economy. Keir Starmer has forced the Tories to attack them on culture war. He's forced the party to be engaged in culture war because he refuses for there to be any actual difference between the two when it comes to economics. And that's the hole that he's dug for himself and he's dug for the party. They think they can win on this. And they probably can. They probably can win on this by just saying, well, look at the Tories, they're not focusing on the cost of living, whilst assuming people won't notice, which clearly has worked so far, that they are also not focusing on the cost of living either, because they have literally no plans to deal with the cost of living crisis, because they'd have to be different from the Tories, which they aren't.
Yeah, what I'd like to ask you is, after listening to sort of things, a bit comments I've heard recently, do you think it's okay to roll back on your promised green policies to win the next election? And if so, do you believe the sacrifices the world is going to make because as these policies are rolled back, and we know that's going on all over Europe, we can see it, are worth a brief tenure in Downing Street?
Nick, first.
Good question. Good question. The callers have been pretty good caliber recently, right? Going back to Dave from Hyde, when he absolutely scolded Angela Rayner on sounding like a Tory and looking like a Tory and answering the questions like a Tory. This guy here absolutely slaying him by just saying, you know, you are selling the planet down the road just to get your time in number 10. So yeah, thanks for that. A good way of phrasing it.
I don't think we should roll back on any of our policies for taking the steps we need to in relation to the green transition, if you like, and we haven't done that. So, Nick, one of the things I've been...
Yes, you have, right? You previously pledged £28 billion per year to invest in new energy generation, to bring bills down and go towards a net zero transition. And now you've said you're going to ramp up to it should the fiscal rules allow, which is not the same as pledging £28 billion a year, is it, Keir? That's not the same thing. No.
Set out in clear terms is that we should have clean power by 2030. That's really hard, really, really hard to achieve, but it's achievable. And that will be one of the major missions going into government. So the date on which we sign checks to do this is not the relevant question. The question is whether we've got that commitment. And Nick, let me just tell you why I think...
Yes, it is about the time period that you commit to spend that money, because we need to start now. I mean, really, we need to have started 20 years ago. But, you know, the better time to do it was then. The best time to do it is now, currently. So saying, well, you know, we've made the pledge so we can wait for that is essentially admission that, yes, he does believe that kicking the climate change can down the road is indeed worth his 5 years as Prime Minister. He's basically admitting that he cares more about his Prime Ministership than he does about the climate crisis. Now, you said it, Keir. Go for it. Well done. Thanks for the stark admission there.
I think it's so important that we do, because obviously this is after the Uxbridge by-election. This has become a talking point. The government looks like it's all over.
Yes, I mean,
Nick, the government's all over the place on this. One minute they're saying they want to keep the target in relation to cars. Next minute they're not. Yeah, Nick, just hear me out.
Talk about your policies. Don't slag off the government. Just in the time we've got. Just talk about your policies.
Absolutely clear why I don't think we should back off on this. Firstly, Nick, because it's about cheaper bills. If you look at the situation at the moment, let's take energy bills. You
don't need to talk to me about energy bills. I'm a marine scientist. I do know it, and I've sent you several emails over the last couple of years.
Yeah, but Nick, I'm committed to this because it will mean lower bills.
Go on, my son.
For people, particularly energy, but across the board, lower bills. It also gives us.
Most certainly it will eventually. But
they eventually
go in, and the way the investments are going at the moment, this is not going to happen.
Yeah, Nick. Just the two other critical reasons why I'm absolutely committed that we continue on this journey to clean power by 2030 is, secondly, the number of jobs of the future that are bound up with this. America is already like a magnet for investment for.
Here's New Labour 2006, and they were awful. Then it's 100% New Labour 2006, right? Someone pointed this out to me in chat when we were doing a bunch of reacts before, and I was talking about how the current Labour policy platform is basically zombie Blairism. All of the Blairism policy without any of the conviction or any of the desire to change anything. And 2006 Blairism is so perfect because they'd basically done everything they planned to. They didn't have any ideas, no plan for what they were going to do moving forward because they couldn't think of anything. So you just had to invent a bunch of buzzwords and a bunch of, meaningless drivel to try and make it look like they had a plan when they didn't. And that's what you're getting from Labour now. We'll use AI to transform the benefits office. We're going to reform the NHS using technology, right? We're going to build robots to be able to hunt down migrants, right? Like all of these it's what we like to call on stream. We like to call it field of dreams policies, right? The if you build it, it will come style policy platform that expects to get things without actually having a proper roadmap as to how you get from policy to result, because they don't have policies. And that's exactly what you got from Blairism post-2005. Ironically, what you actually got was the best policy from the Labour government in the wake of the financial crisis, because they nationalised a bunch of shit. Banks mostly.
Or future jobs. The EU is responding to that. I want the UK to be in the race for the future jobs. Also, I want energy independence.
So scientists, and we've been pushing for the last 3 decades.
Yeah, Nick, but that's why I'm not. I think it's a mistake for the government to back off in relation to these commitments, and we're not going to back off as a Labour government.
But we're hearing comments all over the place. Are you going to keep with the green policies? No answer to the question.
Well, here's Jeremy Corbyn's tweet. Jeremy Corbyn tweeted, "Without bold action, the fires in southern Europe will become the new norm. So will the fires, floods, droughts, smog, crop failures in the global south that our media largely ignores. Those who sneer at radical change are letting our planet die. It's time to fight back." Is Jeremy right? Is your former friend Jeremy right?
Look, I'm not here to debate.
No, it's
Jeremy
a clear
Corbyn.
Text. It's that we should not sneer at radical change. Where's your radical change?
My radical change is clean power by 2030. That is very difficult to achieve. Most people say that there's a sharp intake of breath when they hear me say that. I've talked to the businesses, the enterprises, the projects who will do that with us. They say, Keir, that is tough, but it's doable. You've got to be tough on decisions as you.
It's doable if your fiscal rules allow. Where's the 28 billion coming from, Keir?
It is, yeah, but Nick, it's not. It's
the right person behind this.
Yeah, it's not doable unless you have a Labour government with its sleeves rolled up that is absolutely treating this as mission critical. Because otherwise, Nick, we'll end up. At the moment we're subsidising energy bills. We can't go on like that forever. We've got to have a longer-term solution, and that is clean power by 2030. Cheaper bills. Next generation of jobs and energy independence are worth fighting for.
We have to leave it. You've given us a lot of time. Thank you very much indeed.
If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.